Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us on Zoom and on live stream. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Director of Insights at Friends of Europe. Welcome to this Climate and Energy Summit. It's an annual event for us, those of you who know, who are regular attenders. Those who are new, welcome. It's usually a big feast, if I can call it that, every year, but it's physical. Obviously, in COVID times, we've moved it seamlessly online. We have 3 days of events, sessions that you can engage in. Before I say anything further about the actual event and content, etc., let's just make sure we all understand the rules of the game. Firstly, those of you on Zoom, a very warm welcome to you. Can I just ask you to make sure that your videos are on? Make sure you've got your name there, but also if you need, and make sure you're on mute. If you want to ask a question, raise a point, raise a query, please raise your virtual hand. If you don't know where your virtual hand is, go down to the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little icon for participants. Click on that and you'll see that you can put your hand up. Please do use it, but also I'll advise you that if I can't get to everybody on time throughout this session, please use the Zoom chat. I really encourage you to kind of note down your points or responses to what people have said, because we'll be collecting all this information, and it's also effective for as posterity, so we can understand what people have been thinking and saying during these three days. For those of you on Zoom, a very warm welcome to you. You're not left out. If you wish to raise a point, make a query, etc., ask a question, don't hesitate to use hashtag Climate Energy Summit, and you can post your questions or queries through that route. So I hope that's all very clear to you, and let's see how we go. We've got a stellar cast for you over the next 3 days. As ever with Friends of Europe, you have people from government, private sector, civil society, experts, global institutes, etc., so that we can get to some heart of the issues around where we find ourselves in terms of the climate conundrum, the climate situation we find ourselves in at the moment. It's, this is build us towards green recovery. And I'm not going to wax lyrical about the things that you already know, but there are some data points that are just worth noting. This year, hottest in history. It's likely that it's going to be on record as being the hottest, and I think it's only going to get worse. I think most of you would agree, but look at the temperatures. Have you ever experienced an autumn like this? I know at least in Brussels, it's been hot from spring to autumn, with very, just only moments of coldness. We have an announcement by the China that it's going to go, climate neutral by 2060 or so, which is significant. We have the US elections next week. And as Michael Mann has said very effectively, that, if Mr. Trump gets in, climate change is dead in terms of its progress across the world, and so on and so forth. We also know in Europe, we have established here one of the largest recovery packages, in which the EU becomes one of the biggest debt issuers in the world, and it's the largest use of taxpayers' money to ensure a recovery. And there's been politics around it, as you know, whether it should be about digital, whether it should be about green, it should be about jobs, what about the east-west balance, what about the north and the south, and everything in between. It's what Jewish people and myself have called a matzah pudding of a problem that we're encountering. And we have a number of issues therein as we move forward. So this is an opportunity for us to really think through what the stakes are in the actions we need to take. What are we hearing from global institutions that are telling us about what the signals we need to be listening to and paying attention to? We're going to bring in some significant private sector players in this space to give us a sense of what they're doing to decarbonise and what they need from government. And we will also be speaking to government, amongst others, about what they're doing to ensure that this huge amount of recovery funding will reach the parts it needs to. So on that note, it gives me a great pleasure to invite Helen Mountford, who has been a regular here with us at Friends of Europe. Helen, a very warm welcome to you. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you,
And
and
so,
you as well.
thank you. It would be really useful for us to have I suppose, a no holds barred sense of how is international climate action doing? What's the ambition, given that countries are now struggling to deal with the COVID crisis? And it's a double whammy, or it's one and the same. You've both got the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression, and now a second unforgiving wave across the globe of virus infections, and the system's almost at the edge of, let's say, broken. Over to you.
Thanks very much. And it's a particularly exciting day to be asked this because my answer today will be actually even more positive than it would have been yesterday. Overall, I think we're fairly mixed. There's some real leadership we're seeing on climate action, but there's also others who are dragging their feet or even trying to move us backwards. So the reason I'm so excited today is because the Japanese Prime Minister announced today that Japan will be the latest major economy to adopt a carbon neutral target by 2050.
Great.
Now, it's the third largest economy globally. It follows on the important signals you mentioned from President Xi in China that said they will go net zero by 2060 or before 2060. So we've actually got some really building momentum around net zero commitments, much more in line with what the science tells us we need. We've got countries, it's not just obviously Japan and China, the EU is already there, but also a number of other developing countries. Chile, Costa Rica, and Fiji have all made these kinds of net zero targets and commitments for their country long term. And it's backed up by others too. It's not just the governments moving on their own. We actually have now over 1,000 major businesses globally that are setting science-based targets to reduce their own emissions in their operations and in their value chains in line with the science. We've got investors stepping up. There's a group called Climate Action 100 Plus. They're responsible for over $47 trillion in assets, and they're putting pressure on the biggest greenhouse gas emitting companies to put in place strategies to really reach net zero by 2050. So we've got a lot of momentum building. And as you say, I mean, one of the things that's actually really impressive is a number of these commitments have come forward during the time of COVID, as countries are already grappling with the very difficult health and economic crises, employment crises that COVID has brought along. So why are some countries stepping up and why are we seeing others not doing so? Well, really, I mean, we know the impacts of COVID are absolutely devastating around the world. But this is also a moment when governments are expected to invest heavily. Something like $12 trillion in investments are expected at the moment, both to first address the COVID crisis and then to boost the economic recovery. Now, this is something like 3 times what we saw in stimulus in the 2008-2009 crisis. So a lot. And how these investments are made now, what the policies and approaches taken with them, can either lead to an acceleration in terms of our trajectory towards a low carbon, more inclusive and resilient economy, or if we do these investments wrong, they'll actually lock in the old, inefficient, unequal, and polluting economy. So we have a really important choice now. And I think the evidence is starting to stack up on why it is better to choose the green economy, which will actually create more jobs, better growth, stronger growth, and other benefits rather than go back to the old. But it's important now, we're seeing countries starting to seize that, some countries, not all, but many starting to seize that. Europe's not alone in this. But it's important now that all those making these net zero commitments, these long-term commitments, really follow up with a clear signal on a green recovery in their current economic recovery plans, and then need to follow these up also with clear step-ups in their national climate targets for 2030, the so-called NDCs. Those are going to be essential to put them on the right path to achieve those net zero targets. So exciting momentum around the net zero targets, need to back it up with the shorter term plans, policies and approaches, investments that will get us there.
Helen, that's really helpful. It's good to, and it is important to remain positive and optimistic. And it's good, that we are seeing announcements from prime ministers, presidents, and we're seeing the cash, I suppose, load up. But the citizen might be forgiven by thinking that actually we've had so much of this. There's been a lot of mind the pun, a wind in this space. We've had a lot of commitment, but actually, when you think about the fact that the weather is changing dramatically, almost accelerating, is what IPCC and others have said, that we'll see an acceleration. Next year, we'll probably see more. What do you see? I mean, are you seeing the momentum other than the words? So in terms of action, so you know that where you sit, can you point to what needs to happen now for us to get into a kind of a clean energy system with pace? What needs to happen?
No, thanks very much. And you're right. I mean, I'm telling the sort of positive side of the story here and where we're really seeing the exciting momentum, which there is a lot. But what we've also seen at the same time is that, for example, in some of the initial economic recovery packages, people were investing heavily in some of the industries of the past, right? The knee-jerk reaction was, let's go out, let's support the fossil fuel companies, let's go out, let's do bailouts for aviation industry, et cetera. Now, in some cases, we had countries, including in Europe, who put in place conditions saying, okay, we'll help bail you out, but that means you need to start accelerating the transition to a low carbon and resilient approach for your industry. Others just said, here's the money, take it and run. And unfortunately, that's building in more of the old economy rather than the new. But we do think what we've seen more recently is a little bit of a shift. So even some of the countries and economies that did that, a number of them have started pushing more out with the green growth approach, I think recognizing that it's not just that it's good for the environment, it's actually good for people, for employment, and for growth. So we're starting to see more momentum around that sort of green approach. I think a couple of things that we really need to see happen now. One is just that broad recognition that green is good for jobs and growth, and actually making the investments follow that pathway, whether it's in clean energy or clean transport, public transport, walking and biking paths, or nature-based solutions. We actually see there's more jobs per dollar spent or euro spent. Second, I think what we really need to do is actually rapidly reform some of the policies in place that actually run counter to green economic strategy or counter to climate action. So this, for example, in Europe will actually include taking a very hard look at the latest common agriculture policy that's just been agreed. It moves forward on some elements, but there's more that's going to be needed to really align it with climate ambition.
You should be a politician, Helen. That was beautifully said. Basically, what we know is nothing's changed. They've kept it the same as it is, which is such a shock. But never mind. Those are my words, not yours. Carry on. Let me not interrupt you.
And I was going to say another area where we need a hard look is, of course, fossil fuel subsidies, right? There was a recent EC report that found that Europe still spends something like 159 billion euros per year on fossil fuel subsidies. Now, we've seen other countries, Nigeria, for example, a number of others that are stepping up and reforming their fossil fuel subsidies during COVID. So Europe should do the same.
Indeed. Helen, thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you very much. And I think one of the things that people might be missing, I'm sure people must be doing, is the economic modeling that actually in the context we find ourselves, the harsh economic reality and the need for a greener context and a greener economics, what are the cost benefits of not doing what you're suggesting? Because if people continue to reinvent the old industry and the old society, this is the cost, but actually the benefits of moving in a different direction. So it would be interesting to see if someone's out there looking at the kind of an economic modeling that takes people forward. But if you have an answer to that, I can't take you right now, but put it on the chat. That would be helpful if you've got references and resources. I want to move to Valentino, the private sector. Thank you very much, Helen. Valentino, very large company that you represent. Hello. Great. Good
afternoon, everybody.
Good to have you with us. Can you just ask a very simple question, right? But what's your company doing to decarbonize?
I would say that we are pursuing a strategy to decarbonize since 2013. For us, the recipe is very simple. We need to fully decarbonize the power sector, and the power sector, at least in Europe, has committed to do so quite fast. We need to bring about energy efficiency in the entire economy, and we need to electrify as much as possible the economy. So these are the three steps. We are engaged since many years in all of them. I will just highlight a couple of things that we're doing in the first piece, which is to decarbonize the power sector. We are today the largest renewable developer and the largest operator of renewable fleet. So we are installing renewables in Europe and outside of Europe at a very fast pace. We are deploying most of our capital towards this goal. I want to highlight something which is very important. It must be stressed that today renewables are cost competitive in most conditions, in most countries, with conventional power generations, both new and existing. So this movement is accelerating, and it is the reason why we're seeing this momentum building up. So we're fully engaged on this. And the second piece that we're working on here is, of course, making sure that all this huge quantity of renewable investments are actually being able to flow within Europe and within the grid. So we're investing heavily, and this is the second part of our investments, in making grids more robust, more reliable, more smart in a way to accommodate this growing need of renewables. And these two things together make up more than 90% of our investment plans over the next years. Then, of course, we're also engaged in the other parts of the equation, as I mentioned before. So, for example, we are active in energy efficiency solutions. We are deploying electric vehicle charging infrastructure in order to break the chicken and egg problem. You don't have enough vehicles, therefore you're not going to have a sufficient infrastructure, and vice versa. So we are engaged in all the parts, and we are, I would say, one of the largest operator and one of the largest investors in Europe in this field today.
A very effective record there of, things that you're doing. But as we know, you can't go it alone. As a private sector, we know that even more than any time ever in this past 7-8 months, when in effect the private sector across the whole swathes of Europe has been underwritten by the public sector. What do you need from government? What is it? What is it you need from government? What action do you need from government?
So I saved time on my first question because I expected this question. So now I can tell you a long list. Kidding aside. We believe there are a few things that are needed from our perspective as large investors in the field. So the first one would be to quickly, swiftly approve the new targets, the proposed 55% targets, or whatever the modified number might be, and to do so taking into account the possibility of a green recovery. We have run studies that demonstrate that investing in this field will actually bring, as was said before, more jobs, more sustainability, increased growth, at a slightly higher cost than was previewed before with the previous technologies. So we want the new targets to be approved quite fast, and also the recovery plans to be tailored in a way that green investments in all their forms are a predominant part of these plans throughout Europe and, of course, possibly outside Europe. We believe it's sensible and it makes a great sense for the economy as a whole. The second part would be, it's quite specific, but I want to be specific here to avoid being too
Please
high
do.
level.
We welcome specifics.
I want to be very specific. We are engaged in discussions also with European institutions. We believe that there is a fundamental problem today, and I'm talking about renewables. So installing large quantities of renewables. If you take the new targets, about 500 gigawatts of new renewable power will be required from here to 2030, so in 10 years. If you look at the rate of new installations in the last 5 years, where basically most countries in Europe slowed down the rate of installation of renewables, you will see that Europe will need to accelerate this rate by, on average, 1.5, 1.6 times over the next 10 years, which is a lot, considering the long investment cycles of this industry. And it might vary for certain countries, namely Italy and Spain, where we're very active, to 3 times or 4 times. So that means that we need to radically accelerate the pace, and it's not easy, because one of the key problems is the so-called permitting, which is basically the paperwork which is required in all member states, rightly so, to develop new plans. It is now being governed by a variety of regulations which are different among member states, across regions, across technologies. So we would like to see a stronger European governance in this field. We know that permitting is ultimately a member state matter, but still we would like to see some guidelines, some stronger governance by Europe, and some more accountability by member state towards European sphere. The third piece is still very practical. It's been mentioned before. We would like to see more consistent price signals, short-term and long-term. For example, you probably know that today electricity, which is ironically the lowest carbon footprint energy vector, has the highest taxations, and it's not benefiting from incentives in many cases, whereas other high polluting energy vectors are benefiting from subsidies, and they have a lower tax rate. So this is just one example. There are many ones actually, from how electricity can or cannot be used by vessels in a port, etc., etc. So we would like to see a profound revision. Again, it's a matter at the level of member states, but also the European level, of the price forming mechanism, be it fiscal ones or not, in order to properly give the right signals to the end users and to the economy. I will stop here for the time being.
Impressive. Valentino, thank you very much. That's very clear, very precise, a set of asks. Let's see what others think in the Zoom audience. And I encourage you, those of you who've been listening, please do note down on the Zoom chat what do you think of Valentino's proposals, his action plan of what needs to give. Some of it's been long-standing because under the guise of a single market or like trying to create the kind of conditions for a smooth implementation of stuff, what happens is at member state level you get stuck with different kind of approaches, different kind of arrangements, and different asks. And actually, if there were a better time than now to have some level of convergence or coherence so that all of us can play in a way that's meaningful, but without the obtrusive, administrative, and unnecessary barriers to progress. And on that, it gives me great pleasure to bring in someone who is in Franz Timmermans' cabinet, Anthony Agotha. If I may refer to you, Tony, is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Good to have you with us. Tony, I want before you speak, I just want to share two slides with you, with everyone here, if I may, of a citizens poll that we conducted. That's if I've have the opportunity to do so. But we annually conduct a citizens poll, and where we ask very simple questions about the relevance of the EU to their lives in terms of what would mean to them if it existed or not. And secondly, a question about what the priorities should be for the EU in the future. I'm just going to see if I can get the slide up on the citizens poll. It's my fault I've slightly thrown everyone, because I think it's important for all our people to see. Okay, so you can see there what, I hope you can see what is being said there by citizens in terms of the level of interest on this agenda. No, you can't see it? No, people can't see it. My apologies. But let's not worry about the actual slide itself. The reality is, look, as you can see, 44%. Can you see? It says 44% of people want the environment prioritized, making it one of the top choices for young Europeans. So we asked over 10,500 citizens from across 11 member states. So you can see that 18 to 44-year-olds, over 40%, 44% want the environment prioritized, which is an interesting fact and feature to consider. And I'm not sure I'm going to get the second slide, but there we go. And as you can see here, 49% want the EU to prioritize environment and sustainable future. So these are interesting, effective numbers, given where you'd have thought that actually healthcare, health prevention might have been of the top choices. You can see where people are at. So back to you, Tony. I thought it might be an interesting context setter, more generally, but also in the context of the role you play. When Franz Timmermans was here a week ago at our State of Europe roundtable, virtual roundtable, a festival of politics and ideas, he said, one of the things is that we need to apply pressure to all of us as politicians to do the right thing. He said that, the cap needed to be reformed, but there you go. We ended up where we were end of last week. Tell us, what do you see? I mean, in that context, how do you see Europe's role in stimulating global climate action?
Well, first, thank you very much. You threw me off with those numbers, and maybe I'll come back in my closing remarks with
Sure.
regard to what people think and what they want, because that's a very interesting and it's a crucial number. But and to your cap remark, it's not true that everything stays the same. And I think this goes in general for everything that we're trying to do and put on the table, is that we're trying to be as bold as we can. And sometimes we don't get everything we want immediately, but I think we are very, very excited with the way we're going, because one thing is sure, this is for real. And I hope this signal goes out to people and to the market. I mean, not even a year ago, we came out running out of the stables in December with the Green Deal. Then we had the Just Transition Mechanism, we had the climate law, we had the biodiversity strategy, farm to fork strategy, hydrogen strategy, methane strategy. We had the climate target at least of 55%, and we're not done yet. Now,
no, but Tony, if I can, so I am going to cut across you there for a second. Fine words, lots of money stacked up, but you know politics at the end of the day plays itself out. And I have to say, I said to Francis when I was speaking to him directly on one of these situations, and I said, you know, this really bold what you're saying. It's fantastic to hear. It's the first time you've got a vice president of the commission saying CAP needs reform. We want to be bolder. We want to be stronger. But tell us here now, what is it that you've achieved on CAP that gives you hope last week?
Well, what we didn't have in the old system is eco schemes with 20 to 30%. We do have in the new system. So it is a different game than it used to be.
Okay.
Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. But to those who say, oh, something's dark, but to those who say that we've lost everything or everything is the same, it's just not true. Same goes for other issues as well. But let me, because I wanted to make
sure,
this.
Please do. Yeah.
Wanted to make this point is that what the EU can do is to lead by example.
Yeah.
And I think the fundamental decision has been made by the European leaders, whose council conclusions usually are not eloquent as Shakespeare, but they called climate an existential threat.
Sure.
They have committed to climate neutrality, and they're driving this force. So we took the decision as a EU with member states not to wait, but to step forward. So that's the first thing. And we can see that markets are feeling that this is serious and they can invest because they know this is the long term. Then we engage others in our diplomacy. So right now, as we speak, our development part, DEFCO, is planning the programming of all our programs with our partners around the world. Mm-hmm. And what we will see is that the Green Deal in all its aspects will also be reflected in those programs. We are currently also engaged in an impact assessment and a consultation with regard to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Mm-hmm. Now that is an instrument that caused some commotion across the world. And I think it's important to say here, this is not a punitive or a money-making instrument, but it's an instrument that if everyone would commit and implement their Paris promises, we wouldn't need. But we're not there yet, and we want to make sure that we don't go green and then export our companies and industries outside, who then produce in a dirty fashion.
Yeah.
So that is something that's ongoing. We're not done yet, but those are the instruments we use also to engage the other partners. And as Helen said in the beginning, I think Japan came today with climate neutrality, which, by the way, is different from carbon neutrality, because China's commitment, however welcome it is, it's about carbon neutrality in 2060. Yeah. But it shows that big emitters are smelling the coffee and they're moving away, and we can only hope that others follow suit. And so when we say we want to be the first climate neutral continent in the world, we also challenge everyone to beat us to it, because a race to the top, we all win. So this is how we're trying to do it.
Tony, thank you. And thank you for responding to my challenge. But in order for Europe to be, let's say, a pathfinder or to model the behavior it seeks of others through its international relations, you know that there is the potential to race to the bottom, because a lot of what hinges in the recovery deal and a lot of the investments being made by EU-wide players, and especially the package that's been pulled together, hinges on member state activity and actions and plans. What we do know is that national, determination plans will be in by end of this year, but also governments member states have to put in their plans in terms of how they're going to spend recovery money to make sure it's green, not just green coated, but green centered. How do you make sure that's going to happen, given what we know about the politics, Tony, and we know about the politics between East, North, South, and West, and the increasing and as I said earlier, the unforgiving impact of the COVID crisis, where a job politically means more than going green potentially. Over to you.
Well, thank you for that. Well, first, the title of your conference says Beyond COVID. Well, in fact, we're not beyond COVID yet, and we don't really know when we will be. So I think that's something that you put well. It begins with, again, the political commitment of the leaders, who very quickly said, we will couple recovery with a green transition. So that's where it started. And I think that's important because there's a false contradiction between growing and a green transition. The green transition is not a luxury we cannot afford. In fact, we cannot afford not to do it. As Helen said, it could be social as well, otherwise we're not going to make it. So it started with that. Then in our recovery plans, or in our policies, we say, okay, member states, you have to come up with your national plans.
Yeah.
And in those plans, you have to make sure that 37% of the money that you're going to spend is going to be climate. You also have to commit that nothing else you do will harm the green transition. So the do no harm principle is in there as well. And all other measures are expected to submit. So we have guidelines, and whenever they come with their national plan, we're going to tick the boxes and see if this is the case. And then you say, well, you're going to give them the money and then they'll run. No, we're going to disperse the money while we follow implementation. So we also want to make sure that this happens. Now, I'm not going to sell you this is the best thing since sliced bread, but I think we put into the DNA, we've embedded into the guidelines, into the decision-making rules, that this indeed is going to be a green and digital thing. For instance, we encourage member states, we're not going to force them, but we encourage them strongly to invest in the 7 flagships. 3 of these flagships, part of this recovery, are green. Yeah. It's the Power Up about renewables, and Valentino just mentioned 500 gigawatts. In 2030, we want to get 40% of that already online. When it comes to hydrogen, we would like 6 gigawatts of electrolyzers. Then we have another flagship, renovation. We want to double the renovation rate. That's low-hanging fruit. Yeah. And we have a recharge and refuel, where we would like by 2030 or by 2025, actually, to build one of the 3 million electric chargers, and also have in 2030 about half of the 1,000 hydrogen chargers. Now, that's not enough, but it shows that everything we're doing is skewed toward a new economy. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a paradigm shift. And that's why, again, it's going to be, my boss said, I don't know if he said it last week, he said it's going to be bloody difficult.
He did. It is bloody difficult. But he wanted pressure from the outside.
He says it internally, just to finish, but he says it internally as well. Yeah. I mean, we're not under illusions. But the point is, these are not tree-hugging luxury visions. These are serious visions. We try to reform because we think it's going to be good for the people. This is for health and well-being and for growth.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to bring our audience in that's watching patiently and get some reactions from them. I want to first go to Ursula. Ursula Woodburn?
Hi there, me.
Welcome, Ursula. Can you just introduce yourself and where you're from, what your question is?
Hi, so my name is Ursula Woodburn, and I work with Corporate Leaders Group Europe and the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership.
Yes.
So, Tony, thanks very much for your presentation. I think I just wanted to pick up this point. I mean, I think we completely agree that it's not just about green issues, but that green recovery can really boost, or green recovery measures can boost the economy as well as the stimulus packages. So I think the question is, how are you going to make sure really that the recovery package doesn't end up landing more stranded assets in the system, and that it will not also lead to more fossil fuel subsidies in Europe. Now, obviously, we can't tackle this elsewhere so well. But yeah.
Okay, great. And also, Ursula, can I encourage you to use the chat to put some of your views of how that might be possible to do? We have someone from on our live stream, Twitter. Charlotte, what do one of our live streamers want to ask or say? Welcome, Charlotte.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Damendra.
Hi.
So we were asked via Twitter on our social media channel regarding the Friday for Future marches and the fact that they've lost some momentum since COVID-19. What can young people do to hold the world accountable still?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure we've got many young people in the audience, but let's see what people have to say. Let's move on to. Thank you very much for that, Charlotte, and we'll see what people say. Sigrid Stahl. Welcome.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Sigrid Stahl. I'm a professor of environmental economics at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. I'm obviously not a member of Fridays for Future, but just last week I gave a talk to 1,500 students in Vienna at the university, obviously virtual, and that was organized by the Fridays for Future movement. So they find other ways of engaging and bringing people together. But my question was to Tony and his presentation, which obviously is very impressive, of what the European Parliament, what the European Commission are doing at the moment. This is really important. One thing is, I'm just wondering, knowing the literature about economic growth and environmental impact and biophysical boundaries really well, I also know that the decoupling is still a myth. We're still hoping for it, and we are identifying periods, short periods, where in some countries, in some groups of countries, elements of decoupling for some environmental indicators has worked. Mm-hmm. But it's not a general pattern. It hasn't worked in the longer term. So I'm wondering why the European Commission, the European Parliament is still focusing so much on economic growth, while in economic theory, if you look at Amartya Sen's work or the needs-based approaches, well-being indicators, all the social science is actually moving on and moving beyond getting stuck with economic growth, because focusing on needs or well-being might open up avenues for multiple policy pathways. And I'm not anti-growth. I would love to just continue. It would be easier because our institutions are geared up for that. But I don't see it in our models. It doesn't seem possible to achieve the reductions that we need. So I'm wondering why we are putting up the hurdle higher with this growth strategy.
Sigrid, thank you very much. Can I encourage you to just on the chat, would you set out where you think, put some resources of what you're just saying, and where you see it happening really effectively, put it on the chat so we can actually get visibility of it. Rather than bring that back the speakers, or the questions are posed to, I'll bring you back in a moment. I want to swiftly move on. I want to bring in Hauke. Hauke, welcome. Welcome to you.
Hey, everyone.
Hi. So you've advised many companies and governments, right? So, we've heard what people have said and the questions that we've been asked. What do you think? What are some of the win-wins that companies and governments that we often overlook, or they often overlook, given the work you've been doing?
Yeah, thank you. So, Valentin already gave us some very good examples, right, on specific instances where better collaboration or better win-wins could be realized between private and public sector. So instead of adding to that list, right, let me maybe zoom out a bit. Mm-hmm. So when I think about kind of the road to net zero, right, I usually think about this in terms of the 3I challenge. We need innovation, is to rapidly accelerate the pace of innovation to bring down the cost of zero carbon technologies. We need industrialization, by which I mean we need to scale up the supply chains and capture the scale effects to enable us to deploy at scale and cost effectively those zero carbon technologies. And we need infrastructure. We need to put in place the infrastructure like hydrogen pipelines, like EV charging networks to enable us to actually use those zero carbon technologies. And across all three of these, right, we need close collaboration between public and private sector. So we need the public sector to provide early innovation support, put in place the policy guidelines and to de-risk commercial investments. But we also need the private sector to act as the engine of innovation and delivery, to bring to bear the ingenuity and efficiency. So I think looking at that, I think that the fundamental win-win that is still sometimes overlooked is kind of this mindset of collaboration, of engaging in constructive dialogue between the private and public sector, to work together to figure out how to make these changes happen, how to overcome those challenges, and ultimately let the private sector act as what it can do best to innovate and deliver.
So how can, those are the three I's. And this is, a challenging question, I know, but from what you've read about the recovery fund and the package, I know this is a bit kind of challenging, but what's your view? What's your assessment? Are the three I's embedded in there?
So, fundamentally, yes, right? Because as Anthony laid out, the principles are embedded. I think we'll have to see whether we actually deliver on it, right? Because we're making the plans, or the mains are being made right now. But I think the early things that we're seeing coming out of the national recovery plans that are being submitted, but Anthony will know better than I do, they do seem to kind of include all these things. So we're seeing kind of proposals for infrastructure investments. We're seeing proposals to co-locate EV supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the early signals are encouraging, but again, it's still, we're still cooking the pudding here.
Okay, so we've heard, we've already heard from one very large private sector energy player about what they want. From your experience so far in the companies you've worked with, what needs to happen to get more of them on board?
Yeah, so many of them are already on board, right? And this is kind of both an effect of it's becoming easier for them. So that the business cases for many of these things are rapidly turning positive. There's a more encouraging policy environment. The external stakeholder expectations are changing, but some of them still are not, right? And for them, it's not really a moral argument, right? It's not that they don't understand that this needs to happen, but they sometimes don't have the degrees of freedom to act because they have responsibilities, legal responsibilities to their shareholders, they've got social responsibilities to their employees. So I think fundamentally this is about enabling them to get on board rather than kind of convincing them to get on board, right? So I think what's needed is really from the public sector side, the unequivocal signal that net zero is the direction of travel. And this needs to be buttressed by reliable, robust regulatory frameworks to basically de-risk for the private sector players to get on board and become part of the journey.
Thank you for that. But one of the interesting things that we haven't had any mention of so far is small to medium enterprises. They are by far the biggest bulwark of the European economy, and we have scant discussion around that, but perhaps come back to that some other time in discussion. I want to move straight onto, again, a private sector perspective, this time Engie. And we have Thierry. Welcome, Thierry, to the conversation. Good to see you. Thierry, what can you do? Hello, very warm welcome. What are you doing? What can you do to contribute to a green future? Which sounds like motherhood and apple pie, I know, but we want to hear about what is it you're doing to move us in the right direction.
Okay, so thanks a lot for having me today. So just a quick reminder of who we are. We are a big global power and gas utility with more than 170,000 employees throughout the world and with a very strong European footprint. So we are active in low carbon power generation, gas and power infrastructures, energy efficiency solutions, and gas and power supply. So we have made, and to answer directly to your question, we have made energy transition the cornerstone of our strategy, and we did that actually back in 2015. And it's for real. For instance, we have committed to 50% reduction in GHG emissions from 2017 to 2030. And actually, we implemented already in the 3 years, in the past 3 years, 20% of this objective. We have around the world around 100 gigawatts of installed power capacity, out of which around 28 of renewable capacity. And we recently committed to bring this share from 28% to 58% by 2030. And was happy to be preceded by my friend from Enel. And in 2019, actually, we commissioned 3 gigawatts of new renewable power capacities, which made us the leader in Europe together, actually, with Enel.
Good to hear.
But something which is less known is that, of course, we've been the historical player in gas in France and in Europe. We've been the gas incumbent in France, and we are now among the main pioneers and stakeholders in the development of green gases. And by green gases, I mean biomethane and green hydrogen. We have pledged more than 800 million euros of investments for green gases over the next 5 years. And maybe last number that I will give you, we have pioneered sustainable finance. We have not talked much about sustainable finance, and we issued actually this year more than 3.4 billion euros of green bonds.
Excellent. This all sounds too good to be true. Also, the fact that you partnered with one of the larger companies across as well. No, it's really heartening to hear that there's been collaboration also. But what do you need from the EU? You heard from your colleague at Enel about, there's a very specific ask. What do you need from the EU for the energy transition?
So yes, so I really share what my friend of Enel just said. I mean, we need clear targets in the national plans, but clear targets which would be backed up by quick disbursements. And quick disbursements are critical to keep the momentum. Then the second thing that we really need to expand the renewable development and the renewable power development is acceleration of permitting. It takes a long time to get permits in Europe. Just to give you an example, from the first time that we talked to a farmer to when we commission wind power in France, it can take as long as 8 years. So it's really too long.
Can you just hear that again? Did you say 8 years?
8 years, yes, 8 years. So that's very long.
I don't say that too loudly. We've got the Deputy UK Ambassador here. That's going to give total power to the discussion about, the EU being a red tape monster. My goodness, 8 years for a permit. Dear me. Okay. Okay, go on, carry on. What else?
It's really about national regulations as well. The third thing that we need is really a robust regulatory framework that would give investors and developers like us long-term signals and visibility for our investments. So just an example for this, and sorry to be a bit technical.
No, please.
Renewables have, as you know, very low marginal costs. So wholesale power prices, they go down substantially in systems with a high renewable penetration. So power markets need redesigning to complement the merchant price with something else, like in the medium term, for instance, capacity remuneration mechanisms. And of course, this will need to be supplemented by effective CO2 pricing and a coordinated policy across EU about CO2 pricing is of utmost importance given the benefits that are associated with this measure. Boosting the uptake of low carbon solutions, promoting innovation and being an economically efficient tool. We are particularly interested in the flagship that Anthony was talking about, and this initiative of which is called Power Up is very interesting to support the construction and sector integration of the 500 gigawatts of renewable energy production which are needed by 2030. Renovate, one of our big lines of business is a housing and building retrofitting, and the commitment of the European Union to contribute to double the renovation rate is very interesting. And the last thing, which is very interesting to us, is this flagship recharge and refuel, which consists in by 2025 to build 1 million charging points for electrical vehicles. So all of this for us go in the right directions, but we really plead in favor of quick disbursements, strong and robust regulatory framework. And the last thing I would say is that we need to give to renewable gases necessary place that they should have in the race to net zero by 2050. Even though massive electrification will be required to decarbonize fully the power sector, full electrification will not fly. And this will not fly because this would result in oversizing both the renewable assets and the battery storage investments. So to make this fly, this needs to be supplemented by green gases, biomethane and green hydrogen. Otherwise, it will not be affordable.
Thierry, thank you so much. Both of you private sector players, very, very thoughtful, complementary contributions with very specific asks, actually, very specific asks and very thoughtful ones, but also ones which come from the marketplace. And I hope that we're listening. I hope that we're able to address most of those. I'm running out of time, and I may plead with you just to stay with me an extra five minutes or more so I can get through this. I want to go to Giulia Bedini, first of all.
Hi, can you hear me? Thanks for giving me the floor.
Welcome. Please do introduce yourself and your question.
Yeah, so my name is Giulia Bedini. I'm a reporter in Brussels working for MLEX on energy and climate policies. And as we're hearing some business representatives making some very specific calls on regulation.
Yeah, indeed.
And at the same time, Tony mentioning the carbon border adjustment mechanism plans of the EU, I was wondering whether we could hear the opinion on this possible measure on the part of the industry representatives, and in particular from Mr. Rossi and Kalfan, if that's possible. Thank you very much.
What do you want to hear from them? What do you want to hear specifically, Giulia?
Well, if they think this measure could really help them, and if it's really a useful tool to tackle the risk of carbon leakage, as I understand it, the electricity sector could be covered by the measure. So I guess this especially would be quite relevant, and for Angie as well.
Great. Okay, if we don't get back to them, please do. I would encourage our speakers, but also for you to set out what your thoughts are. So please do put your thoughts down, both speakers as well, in case I don't get back to NG and NL. I want to now move to the UK ambassador, who has been waiting patiently, the Deputy UK Ambassador. Hello, how are you, Katrina?
Hello, hi.
How are you?
Very well.
Good, good. You've been hearing this debate, and you know, the context is not lost on us in terms of poor old Barnier's been over in London for the weekend trying to sort the deal out, and here we are with you discussing what kind of momentum we can maintain towards COP26. Over to you, Katrina.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, thank you to all the contributors this afternoon. It's been a really, really interesting debate. And to everybody who had messages for government to take away, you can rest assured I'll take them away. I think when it comes to momentum, the best way to generate momentum is to show momentum. And actually, the first thing to say is that the UK does remain very climate ambitious. Last year, we were one of the first developed economies to commit in law to net zero emissions by 2050. Our Prime Minister has been very clear that climate, alongside health and trade, needs to be the global agenda for the coming year. And at the UN General Assembly, he was talking about the need for everybody to build back better and build back greener. And in that context, I think we are particularly relishing our joint presidency with Italy of the UN Climate Conference of the Parties that will take place next year in Glasgow. And we see that as a real tool for generating and fostering momentum. I'm a natural optimist, and I can see that momentum, I think. In particular, as an optimist, I always like to be confirmed in my optimism. I think the Japanese announcement has helped to do that. But one of our tasks as co-chair of the COP is to generate momentum. And a date for your diaries, the 12th of December, marks the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And we, with the UN, Chile, Italy and France, will be co-hosting an ambition summit, which will have slots for leaders to encourage them to commit revised NDCs and to make pledges. And actually, we feel optimistic about that. And I dare say if you're a leader, the quality of the speaking slot you get will depend on how ambitious you're prepared to be. That's just the start of it, because we next year have the chair of the G7. Italy has the chair of the G20. And I think within that, the EU is playing a very important role as a credible partner. I was very pleased to see that the Council have reached a position on the draft climate law just last week. In terms of momentum, I think it's also important to remember business. Both Helen and Hauke gave a very eloquent description of how business is showing momentum. We are just about to go into a series of dialogues in the UN context, the Race for Zero, which is all about non-state actors. And to answer your earlier question about how we can get young people involved, my friends and colleagues from Italy, of course, will be organising a youth event in the context of the Glasgow climate COP. So I think, to quote the Commission Vice President, yes, it is bloody difficult, but to quote Tony, it's for real. And we're very much looking forward as the UK to working alongside the EU in this context and to helping to generate and maintain that momentum.
Katrina, thank you very much. You haven't had anything down the wire from this morning to let you know how the deal's going, have you?
Well, what I can tell you is the talks are continuing very intensively. Now, anybody who is a seasoned negotiator knows that the best negotiations are the ones that are conducted without a running commentary. So I'm afraid I'm not going to say too much about the negotiations. Of course
you're not. Thank you.
One thing I would say is that actually, in terms of meeting the Paris Agreement in terms of commitments, we've always been clear that for the UK, that is not a problem at all.
Indeed, let's hope that notwithstanding any ugly or decent, well, let's say ugly outcome of this week, that the UK and Europe are able to play or work together effectively on an agenda which has no borders, actually, and is global. I want to bring in very briefly, before I go back to Tony, if I may, Pascaline Gaborit. Pascaline, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much for
and
giving me the floor.
I need you to be very, very brief before I go back to some of our...
Sure. Thank you for all presentations. It's been extremely interesting. I have two really short questions. How can we make sure that we are made accountable to our words in terms of Green Deal and climate ambitions? In the early years 2000, we had the Lisbon and the Gothenburg strategy, and we've seen that they are really difficult in terms of assessment 20 years afterwards. How can we make sure that we don't do the same for the climate ambitions? And the second question is, can you confirm, that's a question to Tony, that part of the funds earmarked for the Green Deal and the environment or climate, including international solidarity, are not shifted to the recovery plan?
Okay, thank you, Pascaline. That's very good. What I want to do, so as I said to you, if I can plead for you to stay with us for another 5 or 6, 7 minutes, that would be helpful. I want to be able to come back to Tony, but before that, what would be helpful is for both our two private sector players who've given us such effective responses. I want to go to NL first to respond to what we heard from our journalist friend about the leakage point and the carbon adjustment tax. First you, Valentino.
Thank you, Dharmendra. So, of course, it's a very complex issue that we are still studying. So, we believe that when it comes to the electricity sector, it might have a positive, of course, it depends on how this will be designed, but in general terms, this might be a positive measure to contain imports of so-called dirty electricity from certain areas, certain border areas of Europe. I can think about a couple of them, not many, but it is an issue which is being felt by a very small number of countries, bordering countries, and this might help. We're also positive in more general terms about the application of such a measure, and again, it depends on how this will be deployed to other industries. Of course, we have to take into consideration the positive effects and the negative effects of the measure, because of course, we know, for example, when it comes to us, that we would be importing, let's
You've
say,
got a really irritable
panels,
dog in the
solar panels.
background.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you've got a very irritated dog in the background that's barking away. So we just missed the last 30 seconds. Or
Okay,
somebody has.
sorry. So I will repeat myself. So regarding the electricity sector, we are positive that this measure, if properly designed, could limit the imports into Europe of dirty, so-called dirty power. And its approach is now quite real in a couple of member states which are at the border of Europe. When it comes to the application of this measure, and again, it depends on how this will be designed, we are positive that this might help to contain the carbon leakage. However, we have to take into consideration the fact that there are positive impacts and negative impacts of such a measure.
Sure.
So we should combine the two effects and understand whether the combined effect is positive or negative specific industries.
Thank you. Thierry, over to you. What's Engie's perspective?
So on this very important topic, which is difficult, we fully acknowledge that higher carbon prices might result in more carbon leakages, which one should really prevent. So we really think that the introduction of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, the famous CBAM, would be a key enabler and a relevant measure to make the Green Deal happen and mitigate the risk of carbon leakage. So we are very supportive of the introduction of CBAM, and we really think that it will help to prevent us from suffering from unfair competition as a result of carbon leakage. But of course, devil is in the detail, and it's very important that we investigate how it is designed.
I think everything will be in the devil will be in the detail in terms of how it operates and how it's being able to be regulated. However, thank you both for your comments. I want to move to Tony, over to you. I want to give you the last word. Now, can I just apologize to those who may not have had a response to your question? Put it on the Zoom chat, and I'll encourage all our speakers to respond to your questions, please. I'm sure they'll do the respect and justice in that respect. So, Tony, if you want to cover the kind of panoply of issues that you've been listening to, you know, go from the kind of whichever end you want to start.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I wasn't sure I was going to get the floor again, so I tried to answer very quickly a number of questions that came up in the Zoom chat because they were very pertinent. I think so. Let me finish off with the following because one of the questions were very pertinent. One is when it comes to well-being and social transition. That's very important. And I come back to your first slide on the priority of people. The thing is that more than in 2008, when we had Al Gore and the Inconvenient Truth, and then Lehman Brothers happened, everybody forgot about climate. I think it's being internalized more, and all our opinion polls show that. But when you break it down to what this means for people at home, in terms of their mobility, in terms of their energy, their food, we have to be smart about this. This is not about telling people to go live in a cave and munch on grass, as Mr. Timmermans likes to say. This is not about telling people you're not allowed to do this. We're going to take away your car. Because a lot of people, they rely, unfortunately, on a second-hand or third-hand diesel car to get to work. And that car is about 4,000 euros. A Tesla now, a cheap one, is still what, 50,000, 60,000 euros? So you can't just simply say the world's going to be wonderful if we just all drive Tesla. So we have to offer people first the right information. They have to understand, and we all have to understand. We need to explain this, and I wanted to have this message at the end, because we're usually steps ahead. That why are we doing this? It's not true that if we don't do anything, everything will stay the same. In fact, everything's going to change, and we're going to get hurt. The costs of non-action should be taken into account, and these are huge. So the other cost to invest in something new is to offer people alternatives. Indeed. And so we would like to go forward to a market, and we have to enable that. We can't do it, but the market can, to have cheaper cars and to have a secondhand market with electric or hybrid cars, with preferably electric. And as time goes by, this will be more part of people's lives. If you talk about meat, you can't tell people you're not allowed to eat meat anymore. But hey, we can inform people what meat is sustainably made, and we can inform people about health issues in there, so that you nudge behavior rather than tell or forbid people. Because when it comes down to it, and I wrote it in the Zoom chat, Mr. Timmermans always says, this transition shall be just, or there just will be no transition. We cannot do this from an elite top-down approach. We have to bring everyone along. And actually, it's a positive proposition. I come back to the cave and the munch on grass. What we're offering is something that's better. And if one thing COVID has shown us in some cities, in Brussels, unfortunately, it's back to where it was, but at some points, the air was clean again in Brussels. And people realized, and for the first time actually smelt what it meant if you didn't have all those fumes. I mean, it's not normal that 400,000 people in the EU, according to the OECD, prematurely die because of air pollution. It's not normal. And I'm not talking about the babies and kids that have asthma. Somehow we thought it was normal because we want to drive our car. Exactly. So our proposition is a positive one, and we need to continue to explain this to get people along. And so I'll stop there, but I think
Tony,
that's important.
Thank you. Yeah, that's been very, very effective. And, you know, I'm sorry I've run out of time, because that's it. I can't keep you any longer. I wish I could. But we know the second wave, and you never know, a third wave is going to be even more unforgiving. So we don't know what the economic shock is going to be in fullness. We know the public sector is in the biggest debt situation it's ever been in history. And we know that the markets may play in funny ways, but I take your point that actually the markets could be incentivized to create the different kind of context that you're describing, but who's going to do it? Because actually we've been asking for a long time for the different kind of manufacturing and industrial strategy, and let's see what we can, you know, what can be achieved in these burgeoning next 12 months, where actually some of us will feel like we're walking into a tunnel and we don't know where the light is yet. So what I want to say to you is thank you all very much for joining us. It's been a roller coaster. It's been fast. It's only an hour. And thank you for staying with us a little bit longer. I want to thank all our contributors and all of you for being patient and engaging. As I said, if you haven't been able to reach out to you, use the Zoom chat. And this is only day one. So day two, same time, same place. Make sure you join me on the conversation about, as you can see here, the future of transport. It's going to be a long and winding road, as we say, but we're going to have some really interesting contributors to this. And, you know, there'll be conversations about whether actually is hydrogen the panacea, and what does government really need to do? And what about greening the grid? What are the issues? Join me tomorrow and on Wednesday for a continuation of this conversation. Thank you all very much. Take care, be safe, and mind your distance. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.